Now you might notice, based on the title up here, that we're going to talk about what we've been talking about, but different. So, I've been arguing for the last, 8 to 10 weeks that we've been going through Genesis 1, that the big picture idea is that creation in Genesis 1 is being portrayed in a temple story. That creation is like a temple, and the author is deliberately portraying the days of creation as groupings that build the portrait of a temple, culminating the seventh day where God does what gods did in temples: rest, take up residence or residence in those temples, and begin to really and truly actively rule the kingdom territory. What the author of Genesis is doing is heightening that idea by saying all of creation is like a temple. And he tells the story to encompass that. What we're going to do now as we come to the end of our Genesis 1 discussion is we're going to go from the very first chapter in the Bible to the very last two chapters in the Bible, Revelation 21 and 22. We're going to read them tonight. And we're going to highlight a few key things. This is going to be part one of two. Next week we'll finish up this discussion and talk about the implications of how we should be thinking through creation like a temple, our lives like living inside of a temple, what that means for us. And I want you to see that in Revelation 21 and 22, the author is deliberately portraying new creation like a temple. Revelation 21 and 22 is an extended metaphorical picture that portrays a new creation or a new world order in terms of a perfect temple. That the world is being remade into a perfect temple-like state. And so tonight, what we're going to do is really just read the two chapters and try and draw out John's communicating style, how he's communicating, and what he's communicating as temple language. Because this is not easy for us to pick up on. We don't have temples, except for that Mormon one down the highway, that's quite literally the closest temple I'm aware of. That direction? Okay, that direction, there's a Mormon temple with the angel Moroni blowing his horn. Dum, 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 dum. And so we're not going to follow that idea, but we do need to know some things about what temples are and were like to be able to pick up on what these Bible authors are laying down. And this is just the key picture. It helps, in my mind, I think, strengthen the idea that Genesis 1 is a portrait of a temple, and that the ancient Hebrews would have understood this, because in Revelation, John is going to portray recreation in temple terms. It's almost as if he knows what Genesis 1 is about, and he's going to close his book, and inevitably, although he doesn't know it at the time of his writing, close the Bible with exactly where the Bible opens. Creation like a temple, recreation is like a temple. What does that mean, and how should we think about it? In literary terms, it's called an inclusio. The beginning and the end come back together, bookmarks. Your end point is your beginning point. And oftentimes in Hebrew, especially in the Old Testament, you'll see the way they mark sections out in the Bible, and sometimes put chapters and verse breaks, is because of an inclusio. One psalm ended exactly where it began, and this tells you this is the ending of the psalm, because they didn't have chapter and verse breaks back then. How did you know? How did you know the author or the speaker was shifting gears and changing topics or something? Usually he ends where he begins. That's a very common way to do it, and then it tells you, okay, great, that's all one big idea, and now we can follow the speaker, or in written case, the author, towards his next idea, and then when he comes back to that idea, we probably know he's coming to an end. The Bible does the same thing on small and very, very large scales. Let's look at the scale tonight of Revelation 21 and 22. Now, what I've done in this one, and I'm going to ask you, even if you have your Bible, to actually just look up here on the screen, because I want you to see some of the color coding nature as we go through this. John has a way of writing in which he sees something and then he hears something. And what I want you to get is that in order to read Revelation, you have to pick this up. A lot of people get Revelation wrong at the most basic level because they don't understand how John is communicating. He'll say, I heard this, and then he turns around and he sees something completely different. But the thing is, they're the same picture, almost always. Now I'm going to read for you just a couple of things to show this example before we get to Revelation 21. And the first one I want you to look at that I don't have up on screen is Revelation. Hang on. Jerry rigged my Bible in this Bible case. Okay. I'm going to read you two quick little passages here. The first one is in Revelation chapter, I think it's 4, or it might be 5. I've forgotten. Nope, let's go to 5. It should be 5. Get this stuff. There we go. So this is John being caught up to the throne of God, and he's describing the picture. Let's just start at the beginning of chapter 5, but the real crux of it is going to be in verse 5. But he says, Then I saw the right hand of him who sat on the throne, a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scrolls? But no one in heaven and on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne. Okay, that's enough right there. So you see how the pattern begins here. He hears an angelic being here called an elder, probably a cherubim, one of the 24 elders, which we talked about in Celestial Assumptions lesson. He says, look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed. But when John looks up to see the lion, instead he sees the lamb. So they're complementary pictures of the same person. Sunday school answer coming, who is the person? Ta-da! Okay. Jesus is, of course, the lion and the lamb, and so you see him set up his interpretive idea. He's going to hear or sometimes see something, and then he'll turn and see or hear. The opposite communication will happen, and they're the same picture complementing one another. Let me show you another example before we get to Revelation 21. Revelation 7. Starting at the beginning of the chapter, it says, After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds, and the winds of the earth, to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea, Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put the seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. And then he starts listing the tribes. Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Reuben, 12,000. Gad, 12,000. Asher, 12,000. Naphtali, 12,000. Manasseh, 12,000. Simeon, 12,000. Levi, 12,000. Issachar, 12,000. Zebulun, 12,000. Joseph, 12,000. Benjamin, 12,000. This is not actually the 12 tribes. Joseph and Manasseh are one and the same tribe. So he's counting Joseph twice for his own various reasons that we won't go into, but I'm pointing that out. Okay, so he's heard all of that. He's heard this numbering system. Then in verse 9 he says, After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one can count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Okay, that's enough. You could keep going there and you could continue on with what they have to say, but the point is that according to John's interpretive scheme of hearing and then turning and seeing, that the 144,000 sealed from the 12 tribes of Israel are actually the great multitude that nobody can count from all the tribes, languages, and tongues. All right? So you have to be able to pick up on this, that they're not separate pictures. They're one and the same picture described very distinctive ways. Multiplications of 12. 12 times 1,000. 10 times 10 times 10. 1,000 multiplied by 12. The number of the tribes, 12,000, is a way of saying completion. Completion of all the people of God. Which is why he turns around at the very next scene and he says, I saw a great multitude standing there with the Lamb, those sealed of the 144,000, from all the tribes and tongues of men and stuff. He's telling you what his 12,000, 144,000 is. Okay? That will probably never come up again in a church because that's such a simple yet overlooked interpretive idea to the book of Revelation. Those aren't the only two examples, but those are kind of the two most obvious ones. So now let's turn to this and read what he says he sees and what he hears and try to understand what he's actually communicating and saying in his story. Revelation and recreation ideas of the New Jerusalem as God's perfect temple creation dwelling place. John begins by saying this, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Now, one reason that I like the NIV is that it does stuff like this in Revelation. It puts in quotations Old Testament passages. Now, Revelation is basically a summary of all Old Testament prophets, but when he's directly quoting something and not just alluding to it, I like that the NIV brackets it off in quotations. So pay attention to that, because sometimes somebody's speaking and they put it in quotations, but also sometimes he's quoting the Old Testament. Here he's quoting Isaiah 65, 66, a new heaven and a new earth. And what doesn't he see? Sees. Now, think about what we've already covered here on Wednesday nights. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The deep being the cosmic chaos, primordial waters out of which God is going to bring up the land and create life and fill the realms and stuff, okay? So, imagine you're an ancient Hebrew and you've grown up on the Old Testament. And the Old Testament is what I've been trying to teach you on Wednesday nights. You would start with describing creation as heavens and earth. Okay, so that's one thing right there. Just as the opening verse of the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But he creates it out of the sea, but here there's no longer any sea. Now, what did the sea represent? Cosmic what in Genesis 1? In one word, cosmic what? Very good, Jared. Cosmic chaos. So if you were going to portray creation as a perfect state of being and dwelling, what was the one thing you would not expect to see there? Chaos. How would you describe to your fairly Jewish audience that there's not going to be any chaos in a creation story? You would say there is no longer any sea. It is not a literal picture. Let's just start off with the obvious. It does not mean that God somehow zapped the oceans apart or anything. It's not trying to communicate sea, it's trying to communicate chaos. By now you should be able to pick up on that. So, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard in a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Verse 3, the underlined language. Can anybody tell me what book of the Bible this underlined language comes from? Very good, Jared. He said, best case was Exodus. Your best case is correct. This is Exodus language. It is language that derives from the building of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is consistently being called God's dwelling place. When God is giving Moses the instructions, showing him the designs and stuff on the mountain, and he says, it's going to be the place where I dwell with my people, Israel. He will dwell with them down on earth in the tabernacle, later temple. That is language of saying God wants to come down and actually live in and among his people where his people are. This will be very important when we get back from my vacation. That's not a vacation, to just be away, because I'll be with the students. And we talk about the Garden of Eden, because Eden is the first genuine temple on earth. Okay, and we'll talk about the implications of that. It is God's dwelling place, as this is being called God's dwelling place. A tabernacle or a temple should immediately come to mind here. If you're familiar with your Old Testament, as his Jewish readers would have been, and you know the language God uses to describe the tabernacle there, and its purpose so that he can dwell down on earth with Israel, you would immediately pick up on that. And this language, God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. That's all Exodus language. Exodus 19 with the covenant. When the covenant's made, they immediately start building the tabernacle and saying, if I'm going to be your people, if you're going to be my people, I'm going to live down there with you, so we're going to build a tabernacle. The golden calf threatens that, and God says, fine, I'm not going to build the tabernacle. And Moses says, please build the tabernacle. And God says, okay. You ever seen Kung Pao? You can't beat him. I implore you to reconsider. Okay. It's like, that's the conversation that I've always imagined going on between God and Moses. But God's not fickle. He doesn't change his mind. Something else is going on there. Okay. So this is temple language. Keep that in mind. You should be able to pick up on that right from the beginning. So recreation, new creation language, being thought of as a temple, described as a temple. I would argue that all of 21 and most of 22, that still carries the picture on, is going to describe this new Jerusalem, this new creation, as a new temple in which God dwells. But the idea is that it's a whole new world order in which God and his people are not separated anymore. What happens when this order is set up? Well, verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Hey, that rhymed. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Same language as the previous verses. You know, he's staying on topic here, right? His language isn't really changing. God's language is to say, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the beginning and the end. I'm the one who's actually in charge here. And I always was, which is exactly what ideas like the seventh day are actually trying to tell us. You can take time off and rest because you're not the real ruler of the world. If you can understand that God took up his authority over the cosmos on the seventh day, entered the control room and started ruling everything, the same idea is described here. I'm the one who's in charge. And anybody who lives under my authority and is victorious in the sense that they stay in my realm. They let me be God, and they acknowledge that I'm the Alpha and the Omega. They will be my children, and they will overcome, and they will have all of this that you're going to see and hear about. In this book, John, as the visions are coming to you, it all belongs to those who actually accept me as the God of the seventh day, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. All descriptions of the highest God, the only true, ultimate power in the universe. But, verse 8, the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. So, look, if you're going to actually acknowledge that I'm the Alpha and the Omega, you're going to live my way, you're going to get the reward. If you do anything that rejects me as your God, rejects me as the ultimate power. If you go your own way, like the false teachers in Jude, and you decide that you're going to give yourself permission to do whatever you want, you're on the outside and you're going to suffer the fate of those who are on the outside, including, as we've looked at on Sunday mornings, the celestial beings. It doesn't matter how high in authority you are, right? You're still gone. Because there is an authority higher than you, just not him. It's him. He's not higher than himself. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls of the seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So he's already brought this up here in verse 2. I saw the new Jerusalem. Now he's going to return back to this, and let me describe to you what I saw when I saw the holy city. Verse 11, it shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Now, one interesting thing here is, I think 11 through, 14 down here, are mixing metaphors from a lot of different places. One, Eden. Eden, which we'll talk more about as later this month and through July and into the fall. Eden would come to mind here for several different reasons. One is, as a garden, it would have had walls around it. If God planted a garden, any ancient Near Eastern person would have thought, how big were the walls? How do you keep the people out that you don't want out? The gates of the 12 tribes, the fact that the gates, 3 on the west, north, south, and east. When the tabernacle was built, the tabernacle sat in the center of Israel, and you had 3 tribes on each side of the tabernacle. The city is being portrayed and constructed like the camp of Israel at the tabernacle. God in the center, the people surrounding him. He's alluding to this setup to say the city is like God's dwelling. The holy people are like God's dwelling. It's all coming together. And it doesn't matter if it's an Old Testament portrayal of Israel camping or the 12 foundations of the 12 apostles, Old or New Testament, the whole people of God, anybody that ever followed the Lamb, anybody that ever let Yahweh be the Alpha and the Omega, they're all here a part of this picture. The angel who talked with me, so he's continuing what he sees here, had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and its walls, but he's relaying what he's going to hear because he's just a man. He can't go around measuring something this big. How big is it? 16. The city was laid out like a square, as long as it is wide. He measured the city with a rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length and as wide and high as it is long. Let's just break that much down for a little bit. First off, the city's a square in the first underlined statement. But in the next statement, you realize it's wide, high, and long, so it's actually a cube. How big is this giant cube? 12,000 stadia in length is roughly 1,400 miles. That should immediately tell you something. This is not a literal picture. I once had a pastor, my first pastor actually, use a sermon illustration about how when he was a kid in high school and he was bored, he would sit down and he would try to draw heaven. And he was drawing out this giant cube sitting on the earth and reaching up into the clouds and stuff. I'm like, even back then I thought, that sounds ridiculous. God is not going to create a 1,400-mile square cube in heaven and then drop it down onto the earth. So let's get the literal out of our mind and start thinking metaphorically. In the ancient world, there was actually only one building in the entire ancient world, of John's day, I should say, to clarify the timeline, that had a room that was a perfect cube. Any guesses what that room would be? The Holy of Holies. Very good, Carla. So what he's doing is he's multiplying out 12,000, the number of people in each tribe in chapter 7. He's using the same numerical device to number out a perfect cube, but not because of its size, because he's trying to portray two things. One, perfection, completion, all of that stuff. But also he's trying to portray this is the people of God. This is the dwelling. God and his people are being brought together. The mathematical count of chapter 7 of 12,000 is being intentionally repeated here as a measuring number to say God's people are now the Holy of Holies. He now dwells in this city. The city is the people. The multitude, the tribes of every tongue, language, and people group of the back end of chapter 7, redeemed by the Lamb, that acknowledge that he's the Alpha and the Omega. They are now the city, the place where God dwells. You should be thinking in temple terms because the only perfect cube would make them recall the Holy of Holies. And so they're thinking, okay, this picture, this new Jerusalem coming down, can't be a literal picture because it's way too big to actually fit on the planet. They might have thought that the planet was flat, but they couldn't actually portray a literal thing on a spherical earth like that. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so it's a perfect cube. It's a perfect Holy of Holies multiplied out to match the number of God's people. Okay, previously represented in chapter 7. So he's portraying that the New Jerusalem is the people of God. The dwelling, where God is going to dwell is always, in the future, is always where he was trying to dwell in the past. In Eden, in the tabernacle, and later in the temple, both of which are meant to portray Edenic imagery. He's trying to portray that God is now finally, once and for all, living among his people in perfect perfection and order in the cosmos. It's exactly what he tried to set up in Genesis 1. Perfect order and perfect harmony amongst all things. Verse 17. The angel measured the wall using human measurements, and it was 144 cubits thick. A cubit is basically their measurement between like the elbow and the forearm. Right there. So for a wall, that's pretty dadgum thick. I mean, it's like the wall is as thick as this room that we're currently in, which means it's thicker than any walls that existed back then, and they would understand that. And they would not be thinking literally. They would just be thinking 144 is a multiple of 12. 12 is one of his numbers for completion here, for people in government in completion. So he's thinking it's as perfectly measured all the way around. It's as perfectly as thick. This portrait of God's people is perfect. The people have been perfected. The wall was made of jasper, and the city was of pure gold, as pure as glass. This takes us back to chapter 4, where he enters the throne room of God, and there's a sea of glass underneath him. The gold and the jasper are temple pictures. Of course, everything that Solomon made of the temple is gold. The jasper and the other foundation stones that are going to be mentioned in the next couple of sentences were all things related to the high priestly garments, the tabernacle in general. He had 12 stones here. It's not the same list of stones, but I don't think that's what the point. That's not what matters. He's using the stones that actually make the most sense to his audience, not the stones that were historically there for Israel, because his audience probably didn't know what stones those specifically were to represent the tribes. So he's going to use that temple, tabernacle, priestly language to portray a physical structure as the dwelling place of God with his people. Verse 19, the foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. When you see precious stones in the Bible, you should probably be thinking tabernacle, God's dwelling place imagery. The first foundation was jasper, the second was sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth ruby, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th turquoise, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. The great street of the city was gold, as pure as transparent glass. So he repeats his gold glass purity motif there to just describe, hey, this structure that I'm calling the New Jerusalem, the holy city, is a perfect dwelling for God. It all makes sense to their minds. They're thinking tabernacle, they're thinking priestly, Edenic imagery. And if you're thinking that the whole thing itself is a temple, would you put a temple there? More specifically, I don't think you would, because in the next verse it says, I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. I didn't see a place for them to dwell. Why? Because the whole place is the place for them to dwell. This is their dwelling place. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. Now, if the first verse in this chapter said there's no longer any sea, and this chapter says they don't need the sun and the moon, and this is not a literal picture of a 1,400-mile cube structure, you should not be thinking, hey, the sun and the moon are no longer necessary, or they're not there, or there's no longer any day and night. The purpose is God's presence and glory are triumphing over the natural cosmic orders to set up new order. The light doesn't come from the sun and then go away. God's presence is always available, and that presence brings light and warmth that never goes away. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought to it. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So, verse 25, the idea of the gates being shut, this makes sense when you're talking about a city, because city had gates, and you close the gates at the end of the day. It was also part of the temple, because the temple had gates. There was a morning sacrifice that basically kicked off temple sacrificial worship, and then there was an evening sacrifice when the sun goes down. I think they were both lambs, and then you say, that's the last sacrifice of the day. Everybody's going to have to stop sacrificing and wait till tomorrow. So if you were in line, you just had to come back the next day. What this is saying is, this isn't going to be like the previous order of things. There's no tears, there's no crying, there's no pain. Well, there's also not only no sacrificial system, there's also no end to communion with God. You don't have to leave God's house because it's the end of the day and God's going to bed and come back the next day. There is no end to fellowship with God. That's what's being portrayed here. Obviously no sacrifice, right? But it's tapping into the sacrificial idea of saying, well, you get to come to God's house and spend some time with God as soon as one sacrifice begins, and you've got until the last sacrifice happens to see it done. It's tapping into that idea and saying there's not going to be an on-off switch with communion with God. You don't have to leave and come back later. The only way that you'll ever have to leave is if you were a part of the shameful, deceitful ways of the nations and all that stuff. You don't do that. You live like you're in the Lamb's book of life. You're good. You're in. So that's the end of chapter 21. And then chapter 22 begins. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. And on each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree for every healing of the nations. Now, just kind of take this in and remember it. You don't really have to understand it. But the river and the tree of life should start making you understand Eden. The tree of life being the obvious one. But part of what Eden means is that it's a well-watered place. And that's what gardens were. Crops could grow there in such abundance because they were well-watered. So the idea that there would be a river running through the center of it is saying it's like Eden. It's got the source of life, the river of life running through it. And oh, look, the tree of life. So it's got water, it's got fruit. The fruit helps the people survive. It's, again, not a literal picture. It's not literal leaves that are going to heal the nations. It's just the metaphor of saying, just like Eden, God's first home on earth, had a river, had the tree of life, and brought life to humanity. God's dwelling with humanity is going to bring life to it, and he's portraying that picture unfolding here. So you want to be reading at least verse 2, 1 and 2 here, and you should be thinking Edenic language. So he's blending Eden language, he's blending tabernacle and temple language, he's blending priestly language, and he's blending redemption language in Christ. It's all coming together. We have to untangle these different weaves, but they're all, in John's mind, just crammed up there into one big mess. No longer will there be any curse. So that should immediately make you think of Genesis 3, where the curse is instituted. The throne of God and the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face. His name will be on their foreheads. All language of Exodus and Deuteronomy. Hey, bind my name on the back of your hand and on your forehead. This is what Deuteronomy says. Revelation's picture of taking the mark of the beast on the back of your right hand and forehead is a picture of saying you've chosen to align yourself with the devil, the beast, the Satan figure, and his Antichrist figure and stuff. And so it takes the Old Testament picture of saying, swear your loyalty to Yahweh by doing this, and then it turns it into a mockery of that. And he's saying, these people here are the people that live there, the people that make up the city. These are the servants of God. These are the people who live in the midst of his throne. All priestly ideas. There will be no more night. There will not be. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. Language that should take us right back to creation, take us back to Genesis 1:26. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air. The rule that God instituted in Genesis 1 is now coming to its fullest picture, uncorrupted by any curse of Genesis 3. So he starts with the curse, there's no longer any curse. Okay, that's Genesis 3, and then he moves backwards through this Edenic language. There's no sun, there's no moon, there's no light, this creation language, and saying the perfect recreation and this perfect dwelling with God fulfills the purpose God created the universe for in the first place. And the angel said to me, these words are trustworthy and true. The Lord, the God who inspires the prophets, sent his angels to show his servants the things that must take place soon. Look, I am coming soon. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy written in the scroll. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw them, I fell down on my feet and worshiped the angel who had been showing them to me. But he said to me, don't do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and with your fellow prophets and with all who keep the words of the scroll. Worship God. And then he goes on and he closes off the books. But you know, the picture has wrapped up here. We've come to the point where we want to understand what is the New Jerusalem, okay? What is this new heavens and new earth, this holy city? First off, number 2, verse 2 here, the holy city, the New Jerusalem, and the new heavens and the new earth are the same picture. That's going to be one part of this. His extended picture of this ginormous 1,400-mile square temple building is the bride. Come, I will show you the bride. And he showed me the holy city. Wait a second. You're telling me that the Lamb just got hitched to a building? I know it's big and all, and I know he's bigger, but are you seriously telling? No, because it's not a literal picture. It's an amalgamation of a Chuck ton of metaphors, all wrapped up into one another. The holy city, the New Jerusalem, the recreation, and all that it entails, that is the people of God. That is the dwelling here. He's dwelling with his people. His people are portrayed as themselves, and creation that they inhabit as being perfect. They're perfect, the world is perfect, the state of affairs is now perfect. God and his people now have what they always wanted. Perfect communion, fellowship, and harmony with God, with one another, with creation, and with themselves. The thing that God set up in Genesis 1 to begin with. We finally got it. Or we will, because we're not there yet. And all I really want you to do tonight is pick up on the fact that the Bible is ending in the same place that it's beginning. You should, on some level, be thinking of life in this world, in all the ways that we can go about living it, as living inside of God's home, his temple, and how we conduct ourselves here matters, because he's our God. If we can do that, everything else in the middle of the Bible is going to start falling into place a lot easier. Why are we called to do some things and not others under the law? Because it's actually God's house you're living in. Act like it. Why are you called to an even higher standard in the Sermon on the Mount than what the law calls you to? Because the king has now come amongst his people to rule. Act like it. Finally, in this day, we're going to be able to act like it. We're not there yet. We're still struggling through it. But this should give us hope to keep going and to help organize our lives, not in chaotic forms, but in ordered forms under God our King, which is what we're being called to do from beginning to end.